By the time Back Bay's lights began fanning across the windows of Il Voluto, the private room had already chosen its 8. Linen, crystal, a chandelier that hummed with old money, and a table perfectly set without me. My mother, Diane Turner, presided at the head. My father, Thomas, checked his watch. Brooke glowed in graduation white. Colton leaned in like he'd earned tenure at our family narrative. Grandma Edna folded her hands, careful and quiet. The 9th place never existed. I felt the verdict before the words. I hadn't gone to college, therefore I didn't belong at that table. Fine. I claimed a bar stool and a glass of water. Il Voluto softened everyone else, it sharpened me. In the mirror behind the bottles, I caught a woman in a navy dress, bought with overtime, calloused palms hidden under fabric, posture trained by years of being told to take up less space. If belonging was a currency, mine had been declared counterfeit at the door. 3 hours of laughter from behind the closed door taught me what I needed. Status is loud. Disrespect is casual. Silence is heavy until it turns into iron. When the room finally emptied into the corridor perfume, applause, the sparkle of congratulation, the server approached with a leather folio and an apologetic smile. The number printed inside swallowed a month of rent, groceries, and heat. $2,847.63. The message relayed from my family was simple. I was expected to pay for the seat I'd been denied. I stood, smoothed the dress I had earned stitch by stitch, and let my answer harden into something unbreakable. Not my family, not my bill. A refusal can be an exit. Tonight, it was also a beginning. If you were in Hailey's place, would you pay for a seat you were never offered, or would you walk away with your dignity intact? Share your take in the comments, and if real-life family dramas. Hours earlier, the invitation had looked almost like an olive branch. It arrived through the family group chat, a polished image of embossed lettering and Brooke's smiling portrait in a cap and gown. The caption read, "Family dinner to celebrate our girl's achievement." It was sent by Diane Turner, and though it carried no greeting, I wanted to believe the gesture meant peace. The message glowed on my phone for hours before I typed a simple reply. I'll be there. The week that followed moved like static small shocks everywhere. In the workshop, fluorescent lights hummed above me while I bent copper wires into obedience. My coworkers teased gently about fancy dinners and I smiled, pretending the thought of sitting with my family didn't feel like walking into an exam I had already failed. Still, I pressed my best dress, shined my boots, and told myself dignity was a skill learned by repetition. Boston's evening air carried salt and exhaust, that particular mix that only the harbor could create. When I reached Il Voluto, the restaurant gleamed like a jewelry box someone forgot to close. Inside, crystal and brass caught the low light and multiplied it until every corner shimmered with quiet wealth. I checked in with the hostess, who scanned the list and nodded toward the private dining room. "They're still inside," she said. I remember pausing, smoothing my coat, rehearsing how to enter without taking up too much space. Then I saw through the glass door Brooke's laughter, my father's careful nod, my mother's manicured hand slicing the air as she spoke. Their world was sealed behind that pane of glass, bright and weightless. Mine stayed on the other side, where the lighting dimmed and the music turned into background static. I took a seat at the bar. The bartender, James, greeted me with professional calm, pouring a glass of sparkling water with a sprig of mint. I nodded thanks. Around me, other diners toasted anniversaries and birthdays. No one noticed the woman counting minutes instead of blessings. 2 hours slid by. I checked my phone, no messages, not even a casual. We're starting soon. Time thickened. I studied the veins of marble on the counter, tracing them like fault lines. Each one reminded me of conversations that cracked in the same pattern. Mom's subtle sighs about wasted potential, Dad's careful avoidance, Brooke's effortless talent for being admired. A server walked past carrying a tray of tiramisu slices, and for a second, the scent of cocoa and coffee felt like nostalgia for something that had never been mine. I imagined what it looked like in that room, Brooke receiving toasts, Diane clinking her glass, Colton beaming, Thomas checking his watch between smiles. A perfect tableau of success with one empty space carefully edited out. James refilled my glass once, then again, understanding without asking. The kindness was almost unbearable. It reminded me that strangers often grant what family withholds, simple acknowledgement. When I finally stood to stretch, my reflection in the mirror looked composed but brittle, like glass cooled too fast. 3 hours into waiting, the hum of the restaurant shifted. Chairs scraped, laughter swelled, and the heavy door at the end of the corridor opened. For a moment, all the sounds of their celebrations spilled out: the metallic ring of utensils, the clink of crystal, the rising cadence of self-congratulation. My sister's laugh, high and effortless, cut through it like a final punctuation mark. That was the sound of completion, the full stop at the end of a sentence that had never included me. I turned slightly, enough to see the group begin to leave the room in a whirl of light fabric and expensive perfume. Diane's silhouette led the procession, her posture immaculate. Brooke followed, radiant, bouquet in hand. My father trailed close behind, his phone lighting his face in soft blue. For one suspended second, I watched them step into the hall, unaware of me, unaware of the witness their omission had created. The door swung wider and the laughter echoed across the marble floor, carrying the faintest tone of victory. They were done eating. And somewhere deep in the part of me that still measured worth and acknowledgement, something final and wordless clicked shut. Under the chandelier's pale light, everything looked polished except the truth. The door from the private room swung wider, and the sound of laughter fractured against the marble floor. The group appeared like a photograph come to life. Polished, coordinated, glowing from good wine and mutual praise. I could have been invisible, and for a moment I almost believed I was. Then Diane Turner saw me. Her smile sharpened the air. There was pride in her posture, victory in the tilt of her chin. She gestured toward me with the faintest flick of her wrist, and a server in a crisp vest approached, holding a leather folder. My stomach tightened before I even saw what was inside. I knew that gesture. I'd grown up decoding it how my mother assigned roles, how she placed responsibility like she was moving pieces on a chessboard. The server stopped in front of me, murmuring something about the check being handled by the daughter at the bar. The numbers inside were as heavy as the silence that followed. I didn't need to open my mouth to feel the humiliation lodge in my throat. $2,847.63. A price tag for exclusion. A bill for belonging. I didn't look at her right away. I looked at the table beyond her, at the empty chair that had never been set, at the symmetry of the plates and the crystal, and realized this wasn't a mistake, it was choreography. I'd been written out of the performance long before the curtain rose. My mind began its own arithmetic. 4 years of apprenticeship, 3 years of trade school, 1 promise of a college fund that vanished without explanation. I had done this math before, quietly, painfully, pretending the numbers made sense. Tonight, they didn't. Somewhere behind Diane's composure was a ledger she'd never shown anyone. Every dollar, every justification, every choice she made in the name of family. When Brooke's trouble at high school threatened her spotless transcript, the solution came in silence. The tuition checks, the consultants, the transfer fees all drawn from the account meant for my education. I wasn't told then. I discovered later by accident when the bank statement arrived addressed to both parents but opened by mistake. My name wasn't on it anymore. I remembered the feeling, not anger, not even betrayal. Just a cold realization that love in our house had interest rates. Brooke needed reputation. I was the collateral. My mother had smoothed my hair that night, telling me community college was a better fit, her voice coated with a sweetness that stung. I had nodded, believing I was making a choice. But it had been made for me. Now, years later, that quiet theft had matured into this, an unpaid debt masquerading as dinner etiquette. I could almost hear her thinking that this was symmetry, a way to balance the old equation. Brooke got the education. I could cover the bill. Thomas stood behind her, adjusting his cufflinks, pretending to study the floor. Brooke lingered nearby, radiant in her white dress, unaware or unwilling to understand the cost of her perfection. Colton smiled faintly, the kind of smirk reserved for people who've never worried about a bill in their life. Edna, though Grandma Edna's eyes followed the exchange with something different. Her brows furrowed, her lips pressed thin, the quiet disapproval of someone who's seen this pattern too many times and can no longer pretend it's accidental. I wanted to speak but didn't trust my voice. The silence stretched until it became its own statement. My mother's gaze was firm, a command disguised as patience. She believed I would comply, because I always had. But obedience has an expiration date. I had spent years being the reasonable one, the one who kept peace at my own expense. Tonight, the numbers finally didn't add up. The truth pressed against my ribs, demanding air. It wasn't dramatic, just precise, like a calculation finally solved. In that moment, I saw my life as a balance sheet, love credited to Brooke, obligation debited from me. Every sacrifice logged neatly under family harmony. And for the first time, I realized the equation had never been equal. I looked at Diane Turner, the woman who taught me to smile through dismissal, and thought of the sentence she had engraved into my childhood. Do not make a scene. I had lived by it. I had swallowed words until they turned into something sharp. Tonight, I felt the cut. Her voice reached me, calm but heavy with expectation. I didn't respond. Instead, I turned to the server, handed back the folder, and met my mother's gaze. The stillness that followed wasn't silence, it was tension wound tight enough to hum. Across the polished floor, Grandma Edna stepped closer. Her tone was low, steady, carrying the kind of weight only truth can bear. She asked the question everyone else avoided. And in that single line, the room fractured. Did you really take her future to save your favorite child? Every head turned toward Diane Turner, and for once, even she couldn't control the spotlight. The chandelier above flickered as if the air itself had lost balance. The server still stood between us, waiting for a resolution that would not come easily. His hands clutched the leather folio like it contained something sacred. And in a way, it did a price, a judgment, a test. When Grandma Edna's question sliced the silence, no one moved. For a heartbeat, even the city outside seemed to hold its breath. My mother, Diane Turner, did not answer. She adjusted her pearl earring instead, a reflex she used when control began to slip. The gesture was delicate but desperate. The waiter shifted uneasily. I could sense his wish to vanish, to return to the safety of the dining room where laughter was lighter and bills were simply paid. My mother finally exhaled, turning to him with the kind of smile that had fooled the world for decades. She pointed toward me. That single movement, graceful, absolute, transferred the entire weight of the evening onto my shoulders. She wanted to salvage dignity the way people mop up spilled wine, quick and quiet. For her, the family's image mattered more than fairness, more than truth. I understood the strategy. If I refused, I would be branded ungrateful. If I complied, I would confirm my place beneath them. Thomas stared at the floor, his silence working like approval. Brooke hovered nearby, eyes glazed with confusion, maybe guilt, though it was hard to tell through the intoxication of celebration. Colton scrolled his phone, already disengaged, the outsider who enjoyed proximity to privilege but none of its cost. I looked at the folio again. The number had not changed, but something in me had. The humiliation no longer burned, it crystallized. I had nothing left to prove. For years, I had been trained to absorb small cruelties and call it composure. I had learned how to make excuses for the people who gave me life and took everything else. But composure is a fragile disguise. It cracks the moment you remember your own worth. The waiter spoke softly, asking if I would be handling payment. His tone was cautious, neutral, professional. He didn't know he was standing at the edge of a family fault line about to split. I handed the folio back without opening it. My pulse steadied. There was no anger now, only clarity. The reservation, I told him, belongs to Mrs. Diane Turner. It wasn't defiance, it was arithmetic. Facts adding up to a truth she couldn't manipulate. My mother's eyes narrowed, the color in her cheeks deepening. Her smile hardened into something brittle. I could see the thought forming behind her eyes. That I was making a scene, that I was embarrassing her in front of strangers. But there was no scene, only exposure. She whispered something I couldn't hear, and the waiter turned to confirm the name on the reservation. When he nodded, relief fluttered across his face like a small mercy. He thanked me and stepped back, leaving us suspended in the echo of his footsteps. That was when my mother's mask finally cracked. Her voice, low and trembling, carried the cold edge of command. You walk away now, her tone implied, and you're finished with us. It was almost fascinating how easily she shifted from polished grace to quiet threat. The transformation was complete. The woman who once taught me to say please and thank you now stood ready to disown me for refusing to pay her bill. I met her stare without flinching. Years of silence had prepared me for this moment. Behind me, I could hear my father inhale sharply, ready to smooth things over, to turn chaos into civility. But there was nothing left to smooth. I thought of all the small versions of myself, every Hailey who stayed quiet at family dinners, who laughed off insults, who left rooms so others could shine. Those versions deserved better. The words came easily, almost gently, but they landed with the precision of a hammer. Then I guess I already left. No one spoke after that. The chandelier stilled, the waiter disappeared, and my mother stood frozen in her own reflection. Somewhere deep in the restaurant, someone laughed, a different table, a different family. For the first time, I realized I didn't envy them. I pitied the ones still pretending. Outside, the night folded around me like a coat that didn't quite fit. Boston's wind carried the aftertaste of rain and exhaust, scraping softly against my skin. Behind me, the restaurant glowed like a jewel box locked from the inside. The sound of laughter lingered, muffled through glass, then disappeared. For the first time in years, I didn't look back. My heels clicked against the pavement, steady, deliberate, measuring distance between the person I had been and the one walking away now. The cold air filled my lungs until it hurt, a clean kind of pain, the kind that reminds you you're still alive. My phone vibrated before I reached the corner. A string of notifications lit the screen. Messages from Diane Turner, each one colder than the last. Words like embarrassment, family, shame. Then came one from Thomas, shorter, more cautious. You went too far tonight. And finally Brooke, whose text blinked with the effortless cruelty of someone still sheltered from consequence. You made Mom cry. Hope you're happy. The irony almost made me laugh. I slipped the phone into my pocket without replying. I didn't owe anyone explanations anymore. Silence, for once, was power. I walked aimlessly, letting the city swallow me. Bars hummed with music, taxis honked, the harbor lights flickered like restless thoughts. Each step loosened something inside me, a knot I hadn't realized had been tied for years. By the time I reached the corner of Boylston Street, I stopped feeling like I'd lost anything at all. It was close to midnight when another vibration buzzed against my palm, an unfamiliar number. For a second, I considered ignoring it, assuming it was one more reprimand dressed as concern. But the message was different. Hey, it's James from Il Voluto. Thought you should know your mom's card didn't go through. After a scene, your grandma covered the bill. She looked furious, but also proud. I stared at the screen, the words blurring slightly under the glow of a streetlight. The weight that had sat on my chest all evening began to shift. Not vanish, but move, redistributing itself into something lighter, sharper. Justice had its own rhythm, quiet and precise. I typed a single reply, "Thank you," then deleted it before sending. Some gratitude didn't need witnesses. The city around me was alive, indifferent, unbothered by small domestic wars. I kept walking, past the storefronts and sleeping brownstones, until I reached the river. The water reflected streaks of gold and red, restless in the wind. I leaned against the railing and let my breath slow. The version of myself that used to crave their approval had finally gone still. My phone buzzed again one last time. A name I couldn't block, Grandma Edna. I hesitated, then answered. Her voice, when it came, was low and steady, carrying both fatigue and warmth. She didn't ask for explanations. She didn't scold. She simply said, "You did the right thing." The line stayed open for a few seconds after she hung up, as if the silence itself was meant to be heard. I stood there, listening to nothing and everything, all at once: the hum of cars, the clink of a distant bottle, the pulse of the city. I realized then that freedom doesn't announce itself. It arrives quietly, disguised as loneliness. But once you feel it, you know. You don't beg to be let back in. I started walking again, slower this time. Somewhere behind me, life at Il Veluto would continue: new guests, new laughter, another bill waiting for another family. Maybe they'd still be sitting there, explaining away what happened, rewriting me into a version that fit their story better. Let them. I had no interest in being edited. By the time I reached my apartment, my phone had stopped buzzing. I plugged it in, washed the makeup off my face, and stared into the mirror. The woman looking back wasn't angry anymore. She was simply finished. When I finally lay down, the city's noise faded into a hum. Sleep came easily, unburdened. But just before my eyes closed, another sound interrupted the quiet, a single ping from my inbox. A new email. From HR Department, McKinley Consulting. The subject line read, "Reference check, Brooke Turner." The following week unfolded like a quiet echo. Mornings came without tension. Coffee tasted sharper, the air lighter. I had almost forgotten about the email until my phone rang during lunch, its screen flashing a number I didn't recognize. The voice on the line introduced herself from McKinley Consulting's HR department, polite, professional, distant. She wanted to verify a few details about Brooke Turner, who had listed me as a character reference. The phrase felt ironic, my sister, seeking credibility through someone she had erased. For a moment, I almost ended the call. Then I remembered the look on Brooke's face that night, smug, untouched by consequence, and something inside me steadied. I wasn't going to lie, not for them, not anymore. The HR officer's questions were simple, neutral in tone, but heavy in implication. Did Brooke work well under pressure? Did she demonstrate ethical decision-making? How did she handle teamwork? Each answer left my mouth calmly, precisely. I told her Brooke excelled at presentation but struggled with accountability, that she led when admired but withdrew when criticized. I described how easily she dismissed others she considered beneath her, and how image always came before integrity. My words weren't sharp. They were measured, factual, almost clinical. Truth doesn't need embellishment to wound. The call ended with a polite thank you. No satisfaction, no drama, just quiet finality. I stared at my reflection in the microwave door, wondering when honesty had started to feel like rebellion. Weeks passed. The city shifted from spring to summer. At work, I earned a raise after completing a difficult electrical retrofit on an old townhouse in Beacon Hill. My days filled with the hum of saws, the rhythm of drills, the clean exhaustion that comes from labor, not emotional survival. I didn't check social media. I didn't look for their updates. Peace had its own discipline. Then, one Friday morning, a coworker showed me a headline from a corporate newsletter: promotional candidate withdrawn amid internal review. The photo was small but unmistakable Brooke, smiling with practiced confidence, now reduced to a footnote. I didn't feel triumphant, just steady. Some balances settle themselves. That evening, my phone lit up again. Diane Turner. The name glowed across the screen, familiar and foreign all at once. I let it ring until it stopped. When it rang again, I blocked it. There was nothing left to discuss. The next call came from Colton Price. Though his message reached me through mutual acquaintances, he and Brooke had broken up. Something about reputation, something about trust. The same words she had weaponized against me now circled back like gravity. For once, I didn't need to explain karma. It worked quietly. Days later, my phone rang one last time. Grandma Edna. I answered without hesitation. Her voice was softer than I remembered, lined with age and fatigue, but anchored in strength. She didn't mention Brooke, or Diane, or the dinner. She spoke of the old family house she no longer wanted to maintain. "I'm selling it," she said, "but I want you to have it." The words settled slowly, like dust after a storm. It wasn't about real estate, it was about reclamation. The family legacy, once filtered through favoritism, was shifting hands. I sat in silence long after she hung up. The sounds of the city pressed against the windows. Sirens, footsteps, laughter from strangers. I thought of the house, its chipped paint, its stubborn porch light, its echoes of every argument I'd endured. The idea of walking through it again made me uneasy, but also grounded. Consequences weren't always loud. Sometimes they arrived as quiet corrections, small redistributions of what had always been owed. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The air smelled faintly of rain and metal, the scent of renewal. My phone buzzed once more, a message from the bank confirming the first transfer from Grandma's account. The subject line simply read, "Property deed, pending signature." The balance had shifted, finally, in my favor. A year later, the air inside my new house still smelled faintly of paint and sawdust, 2 cents that meant change, not chaos. The keys rested in a ceramic dish by the door, chipped and imperfect, like everything that was finally mine. I had signed the deed 2 months earlier, the ink still fresh in my memory. Ownership didn't feel like victory, it felt like closure. Grandma Edna had been right when she said some legacies aren't inherited, they're reclaimed. The house wasn't grand, but it stood steady, its porch creaking like an old friend trying to remember laughter. I spent weekends sanding floors, repainting walls, learning how to make a space listen to me instead of judge me. The dining room was the last thing I finished. Sunlight slanted through the wide windows, turning the dust into a soft haze. In the center stood Grandma's gift, a solid oak table with 8 chairs. I ran my hand over its surface, tracing the grain. She'd said, "So everyone who sits here knows they belong." I'd never had a table that large before. I wasn't sure I ever wanted 8 people sitting at it, but the gesture mattered. It wasn't about filling seats, it was about choosing who earned them. Work filled most of my days. The electrical business had grown, slowly but steadily. Some nights I returned home too tired to cook, ordering takeout and eating by the glow of a single lamp. It wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. Peace had texture, a rhythm you only learn after losing everything noisy. Then, one afternoon, a white envelope appeared in my mailbox. Thick paper, handwritten address. My stomach tightened before I even opened it. The return name was unmistakable, Brooke Turner. Inside, a wedding invitation bloomed in gold ink, her name intertwined with someone else's, the font elegant, expensive. There was a postscript at the bottom, written in her looping handwriting. "Would love to have you there. Family should celebrate together." I folded the invitation carefully, then placed it in the trash. Not out of anger, but recognition. Some doors close with slamming. Others close softly, with understanding. I had no seat at her table. and I no longer wanted one. Weeks later, word reached me that the Turners were struggling. Diane's credit line had collapsed under the weight of debt she pretended didn't exist. Thomas had retired early, citing health concerns. Brooke left McKinley Consulting quietly, her reputation thinning like smoke. The details trickled through neighbors and coworkers, the way gossip travels when it knows the truth needs company. I didn't feel joy, just distance. What happens to people who build on vanity isn't punishment, it's maintenance. Eventually, false foundations sink. Some evenings I sat at my oak table, reading repair manuals or watching the light fade across the walls. On Sundays, Grandma Edna visited for tea. She'd sit at the far end, her hands folded neatly, her eyes warm. We didn't speak much about the past. Some stories are better honored by silence. A few months ago, I met someone, Evan, a contractor who'd helped fix the porch. We didn't rush. He liked that I didn't need saving. I liked that he never tried. Sometimes we ate dinner together at the big table, both of us laughing at how empty the other 6 chairs looked. Maybe one day we'd fill them, or maybe not. It didn't matter. The table wasn't waiting, it was ready. I often think about that night at Il Voluto, how a single act of exclusion reshaped everything I believed about family, worth, and love. Back then, I thought revenge meant seeing them suffer. Now I know it simply meant refusing to shrink. Freedom isn't loud. It's the quiet confidence of paying your own bills, sleeping in peace, choosing your company, and never begging for a chair again. Have you ever walked away from a family that never truly saw you? What did it cost and what did you gain in return? Share your story in the comments, and if you believe strength can be quiet but unbreakable, like this video and subscribe for more stories of self-worth, resilience, and quiet revenge.